Hello, this is Greg Koopman, SSIS 2016 Session 1 Part 2, Package Variables, Project Parameters, Connections, and Expressions. Each package here has a set of local variables that are set to the package scope. Okay, you can set them to different scopes in here by the container and that kind of thing, so the scope of this variable will be different than a variable set at a different scope, but let's not go there. Let's just keep it simple at this point. I didn't put any of these in my template, and I don't see any reason to unless we have a real good reason for it. Sometimes in parallel processing you might do some stuff there, but right now we don't have a big reason for it in this case.
Generally you would start with making all your variables at the package level until you have a reason why it's beneficial to make it the scope be, like one of the containers or just one of the executions.
Right, like if you're doing parallel processing, you're trying to use the same variable name for like 10 of them, and you just duplicate them, then if they were scoped to that particular, each one of those objects, then they would be running independently, like a counter. Then they would be using the same name, but that's like a little more advanced than we need to be at this point, okay? So,
yeah, but until you think of a reason for it, just try to make everything at the package level, and you'll know when you get to a case where it doesn't make sense for it to be at the package level.
Right. Right. So if I look at this, and again, I use my control key. If I want to zoom out, I'll just zoom out real quick. I can use this bar over here. You can come here and do the fit to screen real quick here, which is kind of nice. But anyways, what I'm trying to point out is that if you click in between here, right now, once it's done executing, you really have some limitations in what you can see at this point. You can see a lot of stuff, even though it still feels like it's inside of a execution. But you're better off just stopping that unless you want to look at some things, like the progress there. So I'm just going to stop that. But if I click in the middle of one of these sequence containers, well, you got to click away from one of these objects. So now I'm going to click there, and notice you don't see variables. Okay, good case for Control Z. Thank you. So let's say while you're inside these containers, and you right click, it's all context sensitive, you can go to a menu. You can't see variables. You see the context?
Yeah, it's not displaying the pop-up.
So here I'm going to go to variables, and hopefully variables. Okay, here's variables. What happened, I right clicked on any part of this area outside those containers, and then you'd see a context menu with all sorts of options, and I went to variables, and now you're seeing my variables, okay? Variables, again, are package scope. Now, I'm sure I can probably go up here to SSIS, and you'll see the same thing here. Okay, so here's my variables. And the variables, I have different things here that I use for variables. All right? And as you see, the scope is here. And you have data types. Now, your data types in SSIS do not correspond directly with the SQL Server. Bottom line. There's some sort of derivative of C# and some other languages. It's a whole hodge. It's not. I don't think it's exactly C#, but the script component is C#. It goes out to the Visual Studio. But so, anyways, here's some variables. Okay, so these I'm going to use in the package because as I go from container to container, I need to. Maybe a counter variable. I'll do a count on something, and then I'll put in a count variable. I'll use that down on another container object. Okay, so that's my counter. I have error handling. I have errors and how my error message wants to come out. So I put them in here. So, like for example here, and these can be changed if they're here already with an expression. That means I've already created the expression for it, but if an expression usually means it's using another parameter or another variable to form that, so it's kind of like an abstraction of it, and generally it's from parameters. But let me not get too far away from this. We'll get back into the variables, but these are the variables, and these are used locally to the package. And then once they go to another package, they disappear, and you have another set of variables. A lot of those are the same names, but they're not the same. They don't scope any higher than this package. Now the next thing we have is parameters. Oh, I wanted to point out on your variables, nothing fancy, but We were talking about naming conventions, and how can you tell a variable? You got a little v at the beginning. Okay? Now, we're going to go over and see parameters. Now, parameters are they're in the scope of the project. The project incorporates, if you look over here and you see my Solution Explorer, this is my project. And when I deploy this all over to the server where they're going to really be used as a server functionality, this whole project will be moved at once. But these are all the different packages. All these are different packages that are, okay? So here I have parameters. Now parameters are at the project level, not at the, but you can use them in each package. So they're scoped higher than the variables, okay? Not only are they scoped higher, you can't change them. They're like a constant in languages, right? So if I open up the parameters, you'll see, here's my brand code and DW. Let's see if I can do this. No. Okay. So here's my brand code, my DWDB. A lot of these are used in my connection strings, which I'll show you later. So, but if I wanted to change them for anywhere in the project, I would change them right up here. And later on, when we go to the actual SQL Server part of this whole thing, the parameters play an integral role there, and you can assign environments to it, environment values to it. So if you have an environment, like here, you see my brand code here is LM for my development. But when I go over to the other side, to the SQL Server side, if I assign the environment, you'll see a lot of this. You'll see definitely that to change to MC, and maybe some other things. So we can change environments here. I also keep track of something called this parameter here tells it I want to be doing testing. I'm going to test. So basically, in all my views, I have a bunch of stuff that might, not all of them, but a lot of them I have stuff that will cause an error, so I can check out my error handling. So really all that's one of those things you're going to have to change manually though. You select 0 here. Basically I'm creating a view that's already out there, and it just alters that view, and when you set it to 0, it will use that view to connect to all the views, and I'll get to that. But anyways, these are parameters, and again, these are used a lot. So the next thing I'm going to show you is environment variables. That's EV. Again, the parameters, I start with a P, okay? And the environment variables, I start with EV. You won't see that today. You'll see that later when we go into the SQL Server setup on the SSIS over there. That's like after you get done with all your packages, you can deploy them there, and then you can run them as a job, and there's a whole bunch of steps there. So right now I'm still just kind of show you the template package. So now we're looking at the connections. So now in your package you'll have connections, right? So if I go into this object here, which is execute SQL task, you'll see it's asked for a connection. Oh, that's DW. Well, my DW is a connection, and it's going to run a query from that, right? So here's DW down here under connection messages down here, which are set up in the template, and I click on it, I double click on it, and I see, okay, that's the server name, and that's DW, right? But that really doesn't necessarily mean that's it. If you look on the left of this thing, you'll see an FX over here. You see the little FX? The little FX means this is based off an expression. It's not like you typed it in yourself. It's using some sort of abstraction to an expression. If I wasn't using one, let's say I connect here and I create a connection, and I say new, and I say should type it in. Okay, so there's one, right? So we got that, and the database would just say LDA. So I'm just showing you how to make it manually. You don't want to do this. We want to use a template, because with this, then since we have it abstracted with variables and parameters, when we change, if we want to change it for all of them and change it for a different server or a different database, we can change it all at one time. Okay,
Hyphen.
but this is how you don't do it, because I mean I did this the first time until I got my parameters set up. But I'm just going to show you the difference in the looks. I missed something
It's
here.
SQL dash prod, not SQL prod. SQL. then hyphen.
Okay, so I can test the connection. There we go. And okay. If you look at this guy, you see the FX? See the FX? You see the FX? But on the one we did the hard code, no FX. Okay? So I could assign this to everybody, but then when I want to change it later, globally, across the whole project, I can't do it. Okay? So you don't want to set your connections up that way. So I'm going to delete it real quick. And where do we find that? So I'm going to go to DW, and as in Visual Studio always, F4 is Properties. And if you look at expressions, everything is an expression. You know, same with reporting servers is expressions. It's a really good to be able to do expressions. So this way so in the expression I have a connection string, and I've created that, and so I'm going to go there and we're going to edit it, or we're going to look at it. So here's my dialog box to set up that expression. So I copied the one I did manually. I figured out where the initial catalog is going to be, right, and where the server name is going to be. And since I can come up here, and here's a mix of my parameters, which you can see. There's my V's, user V. That's my variables. But I should have parameters up here too. The project is parameters. So here's my P's. So as you see, if I went to something here, I can just drag it down wherever I want and place it wherever I want. I'm not going to do that. So I did that already here in the DWDB, right? And same here with the DW server name, right? So down here I can check it. And there it is. So if you look at that's the name I'm going to pass into that connection. All right? So that's how this works. So all I have to do at the project level is change the value for DWDB to something else, and now it's going to point somewhere else, that connection, for all of them. Make sense?
So where that becomes relevant is like when you've got a dev, a test, and a prod environment. So you were saying that the parameters are for the package as a whole, which is true. But when you deploy it actually to a server, you can configure your parameters on the dev server differently than your parameters on the test server. So all you have to do is swap out like a server name, and everything about the package is the same except for that parameter is pointed to a test environment instead of a production environment.
Yeah, if we get this into TFS, we can set it up like we do with Neuron, where we have a development environment and then our production.
And the secret,
most C sharps, you have a web config, so you would be able to set your web config to test, so that you're always, when you're working locally, you're always pointing to test, and when you deploy to production, you don't have to touch anything; it's already set to
exactly, and that's the goal of the whole thing is so you don't have to
production, and
touch.
that's what you deploy.
When you change environments and change stuff, you don't have to touch the packages. You can just change that at the highest level.
Scary.
This concludes this video. Thank you for watching.